I've spilled coffee before. It happens when you're rushing through a crowded restaurant with too many tables and not enough time. The clatter of a fork, the sharp intake of a customer's breath, a quick apology, and a flurry of napkins. It's a clumsy, embarrassing, but ultimately forgettable dance. But never like this. Not this coffee. Not this man. The fine porcelain cup, ridiculously delicate for its scalding contents, slipped from the slick surface of my tray. It seemed to hang in the air for a full second. A perfect, terrible tableau against the backdrop of muted gold and dark mahogany of Serafina's. The kind of restaurant where the water glasses cost more than my weekly groceries. Then, it tipped. The hot, dark liquid arced through the air in a graceful, damning parabola, splashing directly onto the most dangerous man in Chicago. The room didn't just go quiet. It died. Sound was sucked from the air, leaving a vacuum filled only by the frantic, hammering drumbeat of my own heart. Every fork, poised to deliver a morsel of truffle-laced pasta, froze mid-air. Every hushed, important conversation choked and withered. And I, Natalie Blake, a girl held together by caffeine and desperation, could only stare in abject horror at the dark, ugly stain spreading across the immaculate pearl-gray silk of Lorenzo Falcone's suit jacket. It bloomed like a fatal wound over the fabric, seeping into the weave, destroying something that probably cost more than my sister's last round of medication. Lorenzo Falcone didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't even flinch as the hot liquid must have soaked through to his skin. The two men flanking his table, mountains of muscle packed into suits that strained at the seams, looked ready to vaporize me with a glare. My manager, a perpetually sweating man named Mr. Dubois, was already turning a shade of purple I'd only ever seen on an eggplant. But the Mafia boss, the man whose name was whispered in alleys and boardrooms with the same mixture of terror and reverence, remained preternaturally still. He just slowly, deliberately, lifted his gaze from the ruin of his jacket to mine. His eyes were the color of dark, aged whiskey, flecked with gold that seemed to catch the dim light and hold it captive. They weren't angry. They were worse. They were assessing. They were analytical. It was the look of a predator that has just noticed a small, foolish rabbit stumble into its path. For a long, terrifying moment that stretched into an eternity, I was sure I was about to lose my job. That was the best-case scenario. The worst-case scenarios my panic-addled brain was generating involved Lake Michigan and a new pair of concrete shoes. My breath hitched, trapped in my lungs. My entire future, my sister Chloe's future, felt as fragile as the shattered cup on the floor. Then Lorenzo Falcone stood. He was taller than I'd realized, his frame lean but broad, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable power that had nothing to do with his physical size. He unbuttoned the stained jacket with a fluid, unhurried motion, shrugging it off. Underneath, he wore a crisp white shirt that only served to emphasize the dark tan of his skin and the sharp lines of his physique. He handed the jacket to one of his sentinels without a word, his eyes never leaving mine. He picked up a linen napkin from the table, dabbed at a stray drop on his sleeve, and then said quietly, his voice a low, gravelly murmur that cut through the silence like a razor, "Leave her." The words were directed at Mr. Dubois, who was hovering, wringing his hands and sputtering apologies. My manager froze, his mouth agape. The entire restaurant seemed to exhale in a collective, shaky sigh. But I couldn't feel any relief, because the way he kept looking at me, that intense, possessive stare that pinned me to the spot, told me one thing with chilling certainty. I wasn't in trouble. I was in his sights. And in Lorenzo Falcone's world, I was beginning to suspect that was far, far worse. For the rest of my shift, I moved in a daze. My hands trembled so badly I could barely carry a plate. Every time the kitchen door swung open, I flinched, expecting one of his hulking guards to come for me. Mr. Dubois, after a brief, whispered conference with one of Falcone's men, avoided me completely, his face pale and clammy. The other servers gave me a wide berth, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I was marked. The air around me felt different, charged with the residue of his attention. He and his men finished their meal in that same unnerving silence. I wasn't allowed near their table again. Another girl, Maria, a veteran waitress with nerves of steel, was sent to handle them. But I felt his eyes on me. I could feel them tracking my every clumsy, terrified movement as I cleared plates and refilled water glasses on the other side of the room. It was a physical pressure, a weight on my shoulders and the back of my neck. I didn't dare look back. I didn't have to. I knew he was watching. When they finally left, an hour later, the entire staff breathed a sigh of relief. The normal hum of the restaurant returned, but it felt forced, brittle. I spent the last hour of my shift scrubbing pots in the back, the scouring pad a welcome, punishing friction against my palms. I needed to feel something other than the cold dread that had taken root in my stomach. All I could think about was Chloe. Her smile, the way her breath sometimes hitched in a wheeze that sent a spike of panic through me. The mounting pile of bills on our tiny kitchen table. This job, this humiliating, exhausting job, was the only thing standing between us and utter ruin. Losing it wasn't an option. By the time I clocked out, it was after midnight. The cool Chicago air was a balm on my flushed skin as I stepped out of the alley behind the restaurant. I pulled my thin jacket tighter, the scent of garbage and stale grease clinging to the air. All I wanted was to get home to our tiny apartment, check on Chloe, and fall into a dreamless sleep. A long black car was idling at the curb. My heart leaped into my throat. It wasn't just any car. It was a sleek, menacing beast of a machine, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. It hummed with a low, powerful thrum that vibrated through the soles of my worn-out sneakers. It was the same car that had been parked out front when Lorenzo Falcone had arrived. I froze, one foot off the curb. My mind screamed at me to run. Run back into the restaurant, run down the street, just run. But my feet were cemented to the pavement. The back window glided down with an expensive, near-silent whisper. Lorenzo Falcone was sitting in the back, bathed in the soft glow of the interior lights. The street lamp overhead cast his face in sharp planes of light and shadow, making him look like a Renaissance sculpture carved from marble and sin. He wasn't looking at me. He was studying a file on his lap. "Get in, Miss Blake." His voice was the same low murmur, not a request but a command. It carried effortlessly across the few feet that separated us. My mouth was dry. I have to get home. My sister. "I know all about your sister, Chloe," he said, still not looking up. He flipped a page in the file. Age 16. Cystic fibrosis. Currently under the care of Dr. Anjali Sharma at Rush University Medical Center. Her last treatment cost $12,457. Your insurance covered less than a quarter of that. You have been paying the rest in installments, but you are 2 months behind. The hospital sent a final notice last week. Every word was a hammer blow, stealing the air from my lungs. He knew. He knew everything. The file wasn't about business. It was about me. The meticulous research, the invasion of privacy. It was terrifying. It was a demonstration of power, a casual reminder that his reach was limitless. My life was an open book he had already read. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Finally, he lifted his eyes. That same whiskey gold gaze pinned me, and this time, there was a flicker of something new in their depths. Something that wasn't just assessment. It was interest. "I am offering you a solution to your problems," he said, his tone even. "Get in the car." My mind raced. This was insane. Getting into a car with the head of the Falcone crime family was a one-way ticket to a life I couldn't even imagine, and probably wouldn't survive. But the image of Chloe's pale face, the sound of her labored breathing, flashed in my mind. The stack of bills on the table, the final notice. He was offering a solution. What choice did I have? My desperation was a chain, and he held the other end. Slowly, like a lamb to the slaughter, I walked to the car. One of his guards, the one who had taken the jacket, got out and opened the door for me. The interior smelled of rich leather and a subtle, clean scent that I recognized as Lorenzo's cologne. It was a world away from the stale grease of the restaurant alley. I slid onto the plush leather seat, my cheap jeans feeling rough and out of place. The door closed with a solid final thud, sealing me inside, sealing my fate. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the dark Chicago night, and I had the sickening feeling that I had just left my old life behind on that grimy stretch of pavement forever. The silence in the car was heavier than a physical weight. I sat ramrod straight, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my gaze fixed on the blur of city lights passing by the window. I could feel him beside me, his presence a palpable heat. I risked a glance. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. The file was closed on the seat between us, a stark manila reminder of how little control I had over my own life. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "To discuss the terms of my offer," he replied. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of steel that brooked no argument. We drove for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only 20 minutes, heading north along the lakefront. The city's grimy, familiar neighborhoods gave way to gleaming towers of glass and steel. The car turned into a private underground garage, the gate sliding shut behind us with a heavy clang that echoed the closing of my escape route. We rode a silent private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. I stepped out, and my breath caught. The space was immense, a cavern of cool white marble, dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the dark, glittering expanse of Lake Michigan. It was minimalist and modern, impeccably clean, and utterly devoid of any personal touches. There were no photographs, no clutter, no sign that a human being actually lived here. It was less a home and more a fortress in the sky, a monument to wealth and isolation. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to a low, white leather sofa that faced the windows. I did as I was told, perching on the edge of the cushion. The leather was impossibly soft. He walked over to a sleek built-in bar and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a heavy crystal glass. He didn't offer me any. He took a small sip, the glass looking delicate in his large hand, and then turned to face me. "Your sister's medical debt," he began, getting straight to the point. "The outstanding balance is $37,821. Her projected future costs for the next 2 years of treatment are estimated at over $100,000. I flinched. I knew the numbers, of course. I saw them in my nightmares. But hearing them stated so baldly, so clinically from his lips made them feel even more insurmountable. "I will pay it," he said simply. "All of it. The existing debt and all future costs associated with her care. She will have the best doctors, the best treatments. You will never have to worry about a medical bill again." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. It was an impossible dream, a fantasy I'd allowed myself on my darkest nights. Freedom from the crushing weight of fear and debt. Chloe, safe. It was everything I wanted in the world. But I wasn't a fool. I knew the price for such a miracle, especially from a man like him, would be steep. What do you want from me?" I finally managed to ask, my throat tight. He took another slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving my face. "I want you," he said, the words hanging in the air between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, my mind flooded with a dozen sordid possibilities. I require a hostess for my private functions and a companion for certain social obligations. You are presentable. You are intelligent. You were a scholarship student at Northwestern before you had to drop out, studying art history, and you are compelling. He paused, his gaze dropping to my mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. "You will live here. You will be provided with a wardrobe, a stipend. You will be available when I require your presence. In return, your sister's life is secure. A hostess. A companion." The words were so clinical, so sterile. But the way he said, "I want you," the way his eyes lingered on me, spoke a different language. This wasn't a job application. It was a contract of ownership. I would be another beautiful, expensive object in his cold, perfect apartment. "Why me?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. "Because I spilled coffee on you? There are 100 women who would line up for this arrangement." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting, dangerous thing. "Because they would be doing it for the money, for the status. They would be eager. You," he said, taking a step closer, "are not. You looked at me today not with awe or fear of my reputation, but with pure, unadulterated panic for your own circumstances. There is an honesty in your desperation. I find that refreshing." He was right. I didn't want his money or his world. I just wanted my sister to live. He had dissected my motivations with chilling accuracy. He had found my one vulnerability and was now pressing down on it with his full weight. "And if I say no?" I challenged, a flicker of my old defiance resurfacing. He didn't threaten me. He didn't have to. He just raised an eyebrow. "Then you will be driven back to your apartment. You can return to your job tomorrow, provided Mr. Dubois hasn't fired you out of sheer terror. And you can find a way to pay $37,000 before the hospital refuses Chloe's next treatment. The choice is yours, Miss Blake, but I would advise you to choose wisely." He set his glass down on the bar. The quiet click echoed in the vast room. There was no choice, and we both knew it. He had presented me with an escape from hell, but the price was my own cage. A gilded one, to be sure, but a cage nonetheless. I thought of Chloe, of her laughter, of the promise I'd made to our mother on her deathbed that I would always take care of her. My shoulders slumped in defeat. The fight went out of me, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. "What are the rules?" I asked, my voice flat. His expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of triumph in his eyes, quickly masked. "Rule 1, you will live here. This is your home now. Rule 2, you will be discreet. My business is not your concern. You will not ask questions about it. Rule 3, when we are in public, you will act the part of my devoted partner. Your performance must be convincing. Rule 4, he said, his voice dropping lower, becoming more intense. You will not lie to me, ever. I tolerate many things. Deceit is not one of them." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Is that clear?" I nodded, unable to speak. Devoted partner. The words sent a chill down my spine. "Good," he said. He pressed a button on a small panel by the bar. "Sophia will show you to your room." A moment later, a side door I hadn't noticed opened, and an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a neat bun entered. She wore a simple black dress, and her expression was serene, a stark contrast to the tension in the room. "This is Natalie," Lorenzo said to her. "She will be staying with us. See that she has everything she needs." "Of course, Mr. Falcone," Sophia said, her voice warm. She gave me a small, reassuring smile. It was the first genuine kindness I'd been shown all night, and I felt my composure begin to crumble. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork for the hospital transfer in the morning," Lorenzo said, turning his back on me to look out at the city lights. A clear dismissal. "The funds will be wired by noon. Your sister's care is now my responsibility." My responsibility, not ours. His. I had just sold myself to save my sister. As Sophia gently led me down a long white hallway, I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the man who now owned me, standing there like a king surveying his domain, with me as his newest, most reluctant acquisition. The door to my new room closed behind me, and I finally let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding since that fateful drop of coffee had left my tray. I was safe. Chloe was safe. And I had never felt more trapped in my entire life. My new room was as beautiful and impersonal as the rest of the penthouse. It was decorated in shades of cream and soft gray, with a massive bed piled high with pillows and a walk-in closet larger than my entire bedroom back home. A door led to a private bathroom that looked like something out of a luxury spa, all marble and glass. Another set of floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city from a different angle. It was a princess's chamber in a lonely tower. Sophia showed me where everything was with a quiet efficiency. There are clothes in the closet. Mr. Falcone had them sent over this evening. If they are not to your taste or do not fit, we can arrange for more. I opened the closet doors. It was filled with designer clothes, tags still attached. Dresses, shoes, handbags, a complete wardrobe for a woman I didn't recognize. A stranger's life, waiting for me to step into it. The sheer cost of it all was dizzying. It was more money than I'd ever seen in my life, all for me, all because a dangerous man found my desperation refreshing. The thought made me feel sick. "Thank you, Sophia," I murmured, my voice hoarse. "Try to get some rest, dear," she said, her kind eyes full of a sympathy that she was too professional to voice. "Breakfast is at 8, but you can have it in your room if you prefer." She hesitated at the door. "Mr. Falcone, he can be an intense man, but he is a man of his word. Your sister will be safe." Her words were meant to be a comfort, but they only reinforced the reality of my situation. My sister's safety was guaranteed because I was now Lorenzo Falcone's property. After she left, I stood in the middle of the silent, opulent room and felt utterly alone. I walked over to the vast window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. The city sprawled below, a glittering web of light and life, so close and yet a world away. I thought of my tiny apartment, the worn sofa, the constant smell of Chloe's medications, the chipped mug I drank my tea from. It wasn't much, but it was ours. It was real. This felt like a simulation. I didn't sleep in the giant cloud-like bed. Instead, I curled up in an armchair by the window, pulling a cashmere throw blanket from the end of the bed over my legs. I watched the city until the sky began to lighten from inky black to a soft, bruised purple. I thought about the contract I had just verbally entered. Hostess, companion, devoted partner. It was a performance, and my stage was this gilded cage. I had to be convincing. My sister's life depended on it. As the first rays of dawn touched the tips of the skyscrapers, I made a promise to myself. I would play the part. I would be whatever Lorenzo Falcone wanted me to be, but I would not let him break me. I would hold on to the real Natalie, the girl who loved art and her sister, and I would survive this. I had to. The first few days were a blur of disorientation. I lived in a state of suspended reality. Sophia was my main point of contact. She brought my meals, answered my practical questions, and generally acted as a gentle buffer between me and the master of the house. I saw very little of Lorenzo. He would leave early in the morning, before I was even awake, and return late at night. Sometimes I would hear the front door close, his quiet footsteps in the hall, but he never sought me out. I spent my time exploring the penthouse, which felt more like a museum than a home. Every piece of furniture, every work of art, and there were many, mostly stark, abstract pieces, was perfect and perfectly placed. It was a space designed to impress, not to comfort. I found a library filled with books on finance, history, and philosophy, but nothing frivolous. No novels, no poetry. It was the library of a man who consumed information, not stories. On the third day, I found the courage to call Chloe. I used the new phone that had been left on my nightstand, a sleek, anonymous device. Her voice, bright and breathless, was a lifeline. "Nat! Where have you been? I was so worried." I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the cold wall of the library. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Things have been crazy. I have some news." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to sound cheerful and light. "You're not going to believe this. I got a new job, a really, really good one." "Better than the restaurant? Did you finally quit? Mr. Dubois is a creep." "Way better," I said, a hollow laugh escaping my lips. "It's a personal assistant and event coordinator position for a very wealthy client. And Chloe, the best part is the benefits. They're taking care of everything, the bills, all of them, and they're getting you an appointment with a top specialist downtown." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, Chloe's tearful, joyful sob. Nat, are you serious? You're not kidding? I'm dead serious, I said, my own tears welling up. Hearing her happiness made the bitter pill I'd swallowed a little easier to bear. I wanted you to not have to worry anymore. I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about you, she said. You've been working yourself to death. A personal assistant. Wow, Nat, that's amazing. Who's the client? Is it a celebrity? My blood ran cold. Rule 2. You will be discreet. It's private, I said quickly. Very high profile, so it's all under an NDA. You know how it is. Ooh, fancy, she giggled. Well, I'm so happy for you, for us. Does this mean you'll have more time off? Can I see you? The question was a punch to the gut. I have to live on site for a while, I improvised, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. It's part of the job, but I'll come see you as soon as I can, I promise. Another lie. I had no idea if I was allowed to leave. We talked for a few more minutes before I hung up, my hand shaking. The relief in her voice was my reward. The deceit was my price. I leaned against the bookshelves, the lies heavy in my stomach, and felt the true weight of my bargain settle over me for the first time. That evening, Lorenzo came home earlier than usual. I was in the main living area, sketching in a notebook I'd found in a desk drawer. It was an old habit, one I hadn't had the time or energy for in years. I was trying to capture the way the city lights reflected on the dark surface of the lake, a million fractured stars. I was so engrossed I didn't hear him come in. Art history. His voice, close behind me, made me jump. I slammed the notebook shut, my heart pounding. He was standing just a few feet away, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked tired, the skin around his eyes tight with strain. I didn't hear you, I stammered, feeling like a child caught doing something wrong. He gestured to the closed notebook. May I? It wasn't really a question. Reluctantly, I handed it to him. He took it and sat on the opposite end of the sofa, the large cushion barely dipping under his weight. He opened it to the page I'd been working on. His expression was unreadable as he studied my sketch. I found myself holding my breath. I hadn't shown my drawings to anyone in years. You have talent, he said after a long moment, his voice neutral. He flipped back through the previous pages, where I'd done a few quick studies of the abstract sculptures in the apartment. You see the structure beneath the surface. It was an astute observation, and the unexpected praise made a strange warmth spread through my chest. It helps me think, I mumbled, staring at my hands. I have my first requirement of you, he said, changing the subject abruptly as he closed the notebook and placed it on the coffee table between us. There is a charity gala in 3 days, for the Children's Hospital Foundation. You will accompany me. My stomach twisted into a knot. Okay. It is a high-profile event. The mayor will be there. Senators, business leaders, every major family in the city. You will be scrutinized. He leaned forward slightly, his whiskey-colored eyes intense. This is where your performance begins. You are my partner. You are devoted, happy. You look at me with affection. You touch my arm when I speak. You smile. Do you understand? Yes, I said, my voice small. There will be women there, he continued, his tone hardening. Rivals, women who believe they have some claim to my attention. They will try to intimidate you. They will ask you pointed questions. You will not engage. You will be polite, serene, and you will defer to me. Your only loyalty is to me. I swallowed hard. I understand. Good. He stood up, the conversation apparently over. Sophia will help you choose a dress. Be ready by 7 on Saturday. He turned and walked away towards his office, a dark, imposing room I hadn't dared to enter. I was left sitting on the sofa, the phantom weight of his attention still pressing on me. The first test. The first time I would have to step onto the stage and play the role of Lorenzo Falcone's devoted lover. The thought filled me with a terrifying mixture of dread and a strange, unwelcome flicker of anticipation. The next 2 days were spent in a state of anxious preparation. Sophia, with her quiet competence, was a godsend. She brought in a stylist, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper bob, who assessed me like a prize filly. Dresses were paraded before me, shimmering creations of silk and satin. I felt like an imposter playing dress-up. We finally settled on a deep emerald green gown. It was elegant and simple, but the way it was cut, the way the fabric clung to my body, made me look like someone else, someone confident, someone who belonged in Lorenzo Falcone's world. The day of the gala, a hair and makeup artist arrived. They worked on me for hours, transforming my simple, everyday face into a mask of glamour. When they were finished, I stared at the stranger in the mirror. Her eyes, accentuated with dark liner, looked wider, more mysterious. Her lips were painted a soft, neutral shade. Her hair was swept up in an intricate style that left a few soft tendrils curling around my face. I looked beautiful and completely unrecognizable. At precisely 7 o'clock, I walked out of my room. Lorenzo was waiting in the living area, staring out at the city. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. He looked lethally handsome, like a prince from a dark fairy tale. When he heard my heels click on the marble floor, he turned. His eyes swept over me, from the top of my head to the tips of my satin shoes. He didn't speak for a long moment. His face was impassive, but I saw something flicker in the depths of his gaze, a flash of heat, of possession. It was there and gone in an instant, but it made my skin prickle. "The color suits you," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. He held out a black velvet box. "This will complete the look." I opened it. Nestled on the dark velvet was a necklace. It was a delicate platinum chain from which hung a single, perfect emerald, the exact shade of my dress, surrounded by a halo of tiny, glittering diamonds. It was exquisite. And it was, without a doubt, worth more than I could ever hope to earn in a lifetime. "I can't wear this," I breathed, staring at it. "You can, and you will," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He took the necklace from the box. "Turn around." My heart hammered as I turned my back to him. I felt the cool metal of the chain against my skin as he fastened it. His fingers brushed against the nape of my neck, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity straight down my spine. I had to suppress a shiver. He let his hands rest on my bare shoulders for a moment, his thumbs stroking my skin almost unconsciously. "Remember the rules, Natalie," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "Tonight, you are mine." His words were a brand, searing themselves into my mind. I took a shaky breath and turned to face him, my hand instinctively going to the cool weight of the emerald at my throat. It felt like a beautiful, expensive collar. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze in the reflection of the window. I would play my part. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He offered me his arm. I placed my hand on his tuxedo sleeve, the fine wool smooth beneath my fingertips. His muscle was hard and unyielding underneath. As we walked towards the elevator, I felt like I was stepping into the lion's den, with the lion himself as my escort. The gala was a sensory overload. It was held in the grand ballroom of a historic hotel, a cavernous space with glittering chandeliers, soaring ceilings, and a sea of people dressed in their finest. The air hummed with conversation, laughter, and the soft music of a string quartet. The moment we entered, a hush fell over the immediate area, a ripple of awareness spreading through the crowd. All eyes turned to us, to him, and then to me. I could feel their gazes, 100 tiny pinpricks of curiosity, envy, and speculation. Who was the woman on Lorenzo Falcone's arm? The man who never brought a date, who moved through their glittering world like a shadow, powerful but separate. I forced my lips into the serene smile Lorenzo had demanded, tightened my grip on his arm, and tilted my head towards him as if sharing a private secret. It was a pose I'd seen in movies, and it felt utterly ridiculous, but from the slight approving pressure of his hand on mine, I knew I was doing it right. "Relax," he murmured, his voice too low for anyone else to hear. "You're doing fine." His unexpected reassurance helped steady my frayed nerves. We moved through the room, a slow, deliberate procession. People parted before him like the Red Sea. Men with powerful, important faces nodded at him with respect, their eyes flicking to me with undisguised curiosity. Women, draped in jewels and couture, watched me with sharp, assessing glares. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board for all to examine. "Lorenzo, darling." A woman with fiery red hair and a dress that was more diamonds than fabric detached herself from a group and glided towards us. Her smile was predatory. "You came, and you brought a friend." Her eyes, the color of cold jade, raked over me with blatant dismissal. "Isabella," Lorenzo said, his voice devoid of warmth. "This is Natalie." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me closer to his side in a clear, possessive gesture. It was a calculated move, a signal to her and everyone else watching. "Natalie," Isabella repeated, tasting the name as if it were something unpleasant. "How sweet. I don't believe I've seen you before." The unspoken question was clear. What rock did he find you under? I remembered Lorenzo's instructions. "You will be polite, serene, and you will defer to me." I gave her a small, bland smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you," I said, my voice soft. I let my gaze drift up to Lorenzo, infusing it with all the fake adoration I could muster. "Isn't it a beautiful evening, darling?" The darling felt foreign and absurd on my tongue, but it had the desired effect. Isabella's painted smile tightened. Lorenzo's eyes glinted with something that might have been amusement. "It is now," he said, his voice a low purr meant only for me, but loud enough for Isabella to hear. He brushed a stray tendril of hair from my cheek, his touch lingering. The gesture was so intimate, so possessive, it silenced any further comments from the redhead. With a curt nod, Isabella swept away, her back rigid with fury. I felt a small, shaky thrill of victory. I had survived my first test. Lorenzo led me towards the terrace, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. The cool night air was a relief. We stood by the balustrade, looking down at the manicured gardens below. "You handled that well," he said quietly. "I was just following orders," I replied, my voice a little breathless. My heart was still pounding from the encounter. "Nevertheless," he said. He turned to face me, his body shielding me from the view of the ballroom. "Isabella is the daughter of the head of the Ricci family. They have been trying to arrange a marriage alliance for years. Your presence here tonight has sent a very clear message." So that was it. I wasn't just a companion. I was a statement. A walking, talking declaration that Lorenzo Falcone was not available for purchase or alliance. I was a shield, a beautifully dressed pawn in his dangerous games. The realization should have made me angry, but mostly, I just felt tired. "What happens when you get tired of your message?" I asked, the words out before I could stop them. His expression hardened. For a moment, I thought I had pushed too far. But then, he sighed, a quiet, weary sound. He looked out at the dark garden, his profile sharp and lonely against the distant city lights. "I don't know," he said, and for the first time, he sounded not like a Mafia boss, but like a man trapped by his own circumstances. The mask of command slipped for just a second, revealing a glimpse of the person underneath. It was a crack in the armor, and it was more compelling than all his power and wealth. Before I could respond, a man approached us. He was older, with silver hair and a kind face, but his eyes were sharp. It was the mayor. "Lorenzo," the mayor said, extending a hand. "Good to see you supporting the cause." His eyes, like everyone else's, landed on me. Lorenzo shook his hand, his powerful persona snapping back into place. Mayor Thompson, of course, it's a worthy cause. He placed his hand on the small of my back, a warm, firm pressure that was both a comfort and a claim. I'd like you to meet Natalie Blake. I smiled and shook the mayor's hand, murmuring a polite greeting. We exchanged a few minutes of small talk, Lorenzo guiding the conversation with effortless skill. I played my part, smiling, nodding, touching his arm at the appropriate moments. I felt him watching me, approving of my performance. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, the powerful, enigmatic billionaire and his adoring, beautiful partner. It was a flawless illusion. But as I stood there, smiling until my face ached, I felt the weight of the emerald at my throat, a constant, cold reminder of the truth. It was all a lie, and the lie was my life now. The rest of the evening passed in a similar fashion. We circulated, we smiled, we made small talk. Lorenzo was a master of this world, navigating its treacherous currents with a calm authority that was both fascinating and terrifying to watch. And I, his shadow, stayed by his side, my smile pinned in place. I learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tensing of his jaw when a business rival approached, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes when someone looked at me for too long. At one point, he was pulled into a conversation with a senator, a discussion about zoning laws that was clearly business disguised as pleasantry. I stood slightly apart, nursing a glass of champagne I hadn't touched. A man I recognized from the restaurant, one of Lorenzo's top lieutenants, a man named Marco with slicked back hair and eyes that were always calculating, approached me. "You're doing well," Marco said, his voice smooth as silk. "The boss is pleased." "I'm glad to hear it," I said coolly, not liking the way he was looking at me, as if I were a new car Lorenzo had just acquired. "He's not an easy man to please," Marco continued, taking a step closer. "But he seems to have taken a special interest in you. A spill of coffee. Very Cinderella." His tone was mocking, and it set my teeth on edge. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, turning my gaze back towards Lorenzo. "Don't you?" Marco chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. "Just a piece of friendly advice. Don't get too comfortable. The boss's interests, they can be fleeting. Enjoy the view from the penthouse while it lasts." Before I could form a reply, Lorenzo's conversation ended. He turned, and the look he gave Marco was glacial. Marco's smug expression vanished, replaced by one of careful deference. He gave a slight nod and melted back into the crowd. "What did he want?" Lorenzo asked, his voice tight. "Just making conversation," I lied, not wanting to cause trouble. Rule 4, you will not lie to me. The memory of it sent a prickle of fear down my spine, but telling him Marco had threatened me felt more dangerous. Lorenzo studied my face for a long moment, his eyes searching mine. I held his gaze, trying to keep my expression neutral. I felt like he could see right through me, to the lie cowering in my thoughts. But finally, he just nodded. "Stay away from him." It was a command. We left shortly after that. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, but it was a different kind of silence than before. It was charged, heavy with the events of the evening. When the elevator opened into the apartment, I kicked off my painful heels with a sigh of relief. "I'm going to bed," I said, my voice weary. "Thank you for the evening." It felt like a strange thing to thank him for, but I didn't know what else to say. "Natalie?" I stopped, my back to him. "You did more than what was required tonight," he said. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "You were convincing." I turned around. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and was loosening his bow tie. In the soft light of the apartment, with the glittering city behind him, he looked younger, less formidable. "It's what you're paying for, isn't it?" I said, the words sharper than I intended. The exhaustion and the stress of the evening were making my carefully constructed walls crumble. His eyes darkened. He took a step towards me. Is that all this is to you? A transaction? Isn't it? I shot back, my voice rising. You bought me. You paid off my sister's debt, and in return, I live in your apartment and wear your jewels and pretend to adore you in public. What would you call it? He was in front of me now, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his whiskey eyes, feel the heat radiating from his body. My heart was hammering, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I had crossed a line. I had broken the facade. I would call it a necessity, he said, his voice a low, intense growl. For both of us. His gaze dropped to my mouth. The air between us crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with the unspoken thing that had been simmering between us since the moment I'd first met his eyes over a splash of hot coffee. I knew I should step back, retreat to the safety of my room, but I was frozen, mesmerized by the raw emotion in his face. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle. You are not an object to me, Natalie. And then he leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was hard and demanding, a kiss born of frustration and a deep, lonely hunger. It was the kiss of a man who was used to taking what he wanted, but there was a desperation in it, a raw need that took my breath away. All the tension of the evening, all the unspoken words, all the fear and the confusing flickers of attraction erupted in that single point of contact. For a split second I was rigid with shock. My mind screamed at me to pull away, that this was wrong, that he was my captor. But then my body betrayed me. A jolt of pure, unadulterated heat shot through me, and without thinking, my hands came up to grip his arms. My lips softened under his, and I found myself kissing him back. The taste of him, whiskey, and something uniquely his own, was intoxicating. It was a kiss that broke all the rules. It wasn't part of the performance. It wasn't for an audience. It was real, and that made it terrifying. He deepened the kiss, one hand sliding from my jaw down to my waist, pulling me flush against him. I could feel the hard planes of his chest, the frantic beating of his heart. Or maybe it was mine. I was drowning in the sensation of him, the scent of his skin, the firm pressure of his mouth. Then, as suddenly as it began, he broke away. He rested his forehead against mine, his breathing ragged. His eyes were closed, his expression pained. This, he started, his voice rough. This was not part of the agreement. I couldn't speak. I could only stare at him, my lips tingling, my body humming with an energy I didn't know what to do with. The line between the performance and reality had just been irrevocably blurred. He stepped back, putting a careful distance between us. The mask of the impassive crime boss slid back into place, but his eyes were still dark with a turbulent emotion he couldn't quite hide. Go to bed, Natalie, he said, his voice strained. He turned away from me, running a hand through his dark hair. Without another word, I fled. I practically ran to my room, my borrowed dress rustling around me. I closed the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. I touched my lips. They still felt bruised, still tasted of him. The agreement. He was right. A kiss like that was not part of our cold, clinical arrangement. It was something else entirely. It was a moment of weakness, a moment of shared intimacy that had changed everything. I was supposed to be his possession, his pawn. But in that kiss, for a fleeting, terrifying moment, we had been two people, lost and lonely, reaching for each other in the dark. The dynamic had shifted. He wasn't just my captor anymore, and I was in far more danger than I had ever been before. Not of him, but of myself. The days following the gala were thick with an awkward, unspoken tension. Lorenzo and I went back to avoiding each other, but the avoidance was different now. It wasn't the detached ignorance of the first few days. It was a deliberate, conscious act. When we did pass in the long, white hallways, our eyes would meet for a split second, and the memory of that kiss would arc between us, hot and electric, before we both looked away. The air in the penthouse felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. He didn't mention the kiss, and neither did I. We retreated behind our respective walls, pretending it had never happened. But it had. It lived in the space between us, in the sudden silence when I entered a room, in the way he would clench his jaw when he looked at me. I was a complication he hadn't anticipated, and he didn't know what to do with me. Frankly, I didn't know what to do with myself. My feelings were a tangled mess of fear, resentment, and a confusing, insistent pull towards him that I was trying desperately to ignore. About a week after the gala, I was sitting by the window, sketching, when my phone rang. It was Chloe. "Nat, you will not believe it," she squealed, her voice stronger and clearer than I had heard it in months. "I just got back from my appointment with the new specialist, Dr. Alistair Finch. He's like world-renowned or something. He's talking about a new gene therapy trial. He says I might be a candidate. He says it could be a real fix, not just a treatment." My sketchbook fell from my lap. "Chloe, are you serious?" "Completely. He was amazing, Nat. He spent over an hour with me. And the hospital. It's like a 5-star hotel. They said everything is completely covered. Everything. Nat, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years." Tears of relief streamed down my face. This was it. This was why I was here. This was the justification for every lie, every moment of fear, every compromised piece of myself. Chloe had a chance. A real chance at a future. That's incredible, Chloe," I sobbed, laughing at the same time. "It's because of you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your new boss, whoever he is, he's a miracle worker. You have to thank him for me, okay? Thank him 1,000,000 times." "I will," I promised, my throat tight. "I will." After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, the tears still wet on my cheeks. He had done this. Lorenzo. He had kept his word, and then some. He hadn't just paid the bills. He had used his immense power and influence to get her the best possible care in the country. He had given my sister hope. I had to thank him. It was more than just Chloe's request. It was a deep, overwhelming need inside me. I had to acknowledge what he had done. I found him in his office. I had never been inside before. The door was slightly ajar. I knocked softly. "Come in." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was as stark and imposing as the man himself. Dark wood paneling, a massive desk of polished obsidian, and one wall that was a complex bank of monitors displaying stock tickers and security feeds. He was on the phone, his back to me, looking out at the city. "No, that's unacceptable," he was saying, his voice sharp and cold. "Liquidate the assets. I want him ruined by morning. I don't care what it takes. Make it happen." He hung up and turned around, his face a mask of ruthless command. For a second I was frozen, reminded of exactly who and what he was. This was the man who destroyed people with a single phone call. But then he saw me, and his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Natalie, is something wrong?" "No," I said, finding my voice. "Nothing's wrong. It's the opposite. I just spoke to Chloe." I took a breath. "She told me about Dr. Finch, about the trial. Lorenzo, thank you." The words felt inadequate, small in the face of the gift he had given us. I don't know how to thank you." He looked away from me, towards the window. He seemed almost uncomfortable with my gratitude. "It was part of our agreement," he said dismissively. "No, it wasn't," I insisted, taking a step closer. "The agreement was to pay her bills. This is more. You gave her the best. You gave her hope. Why?" He was silent for a long moment. "Her file mentioned she likes to paint," he said finally, his voice quiet, "but hasn't had the energy in years." He turned back to me, and his eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't name. It looked like pain. Everyone deserves a chance to do the thing they love. It was another crack in the armor, a glimpse of the man behind the monster. He had read her file, not just the medical data, but the personal details. He had seen a part of her that reminded him of something or someone. Who was she? I asked softly, the question coming from a place of pure instinct. His head snapped up, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. That is none of your concern. The walls were back up, higher and thicker than before. You said everyone deserves a chance to do what they love. I pressed gently, emboldened by some strange new courage. Who didn't get their chance? He stared at me, his jaw tight, a muscle twitching. I thought he was going to throw me out. But instead, he walked over to his desk and opened a locked drawer. He pulled out a small, worn leather-bound book. It looked like an old journal. He held it for a moment, his thumb stroking the cover, before looking back at me. My brother, he said, his voice rough with an old, deep grief. His name was Matteo. He was older than me by 2 years. He was supposed to take over the family business. He was the charming one, the one everyone loved. I was just the shadow. He gave a short, bitter laugh. He hated it. All of it. The violence, the politics. He wanted to be a musician. He played the cello. He was brilliant. He opened the journal. It was filled not with words, but with handwritten sheet music. When I was 17, our parents and Matteo were killed. A car bomb. It was meant for my father, a rival family, or so we thought at the time. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the journal. I was the only one left. I had to take over. I had to become this. He gestured vaguely at the office, the monitors, the penthouse. I had to find the men who did it. And I did. I hunted them down, one by one. I destroyed them. I learned to be ruthless because I had to be. I buried the man I was and became the man I needed to be to survive, to protect what was left. He looked at me, and his eyes were raw with a pain so profound it stole my breath. He never got his chance. He never got to play in an orchestra. He never got to be anything but a Falcone. Your sister, she deserves her chance. This was it, the vulnerable revelation, the secret heart of his tragedy. It explained everything, his isolation, his control, his emotional armor. He wasn't a monster born of malice, but a boy who had been forced to become a king, haunted by the ghost of the brother he'd lost and the man he might have been. My heart ached for him. Without thinking, I closed the distance between us and placed my hand on his arm. He flinched at the contact but didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, Lorenzo, I whispered. He looked down at my hand on his arm and then up at my face. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. The memory of the kiss, the weight of his confession, the dawning of a new, terrifyingly fragile understanding between us. He was more than a captor, and I was becoming more than a prisoner. We were two lonely people in a glass tower, bound by a tragedy and a transaction. And something else, something new and fragile and dangerous, was starting to grow between us. He covered my hand with his own, his grip firm, and for the first time since I'd entered this gilded cage, I didn't feel like I was acting. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. That night marked a definitive shift. The tension between us didn't disappear, but it changed. It was less about awkwardness and more about a quiet, simmering awareness. We started eating dinner together. Not every night, but often. We wouldn't talk much, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. I'd watch him across the polished table, seeing the shadows of the boy he'd been in the stern lines of his face. He, in turn, would watch me, his gaze thoughtful, no longer just assessing, but seeing. One evening, a storm rolled in off the lake. The sky turned a bruised purple gray, and the wind howled around the penthouse, rattling the immense panes of glass. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the apartment into a sudden, deep darkness, save for the frantic, strobing flashes of lightning that lit up the skyline. I gasped, my heart leaping into my throat. I'd always hated storms. A beam of light cut through the darkness. It was Lorenzo, holding his phone. "The building's backup generator should have kicked in," he said, his voice calm and steady in the dark. "Must be a malfunction." He walked over to the window. A brilliant fork of lightning illuminated his face, making him look like a storm god, powerful and elemental. "It's a bad one," he remarked. My breathing was shallow. I was trying not to let my irrational fear show, but my hands were trembling. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice closer now. He must have seen me huddled on the sofa. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice tight. "Just startled." Another crash of thunder, louder this time, shook the building. I couldn't suppress a small yelp and drew my knees up to my chest. I felt the sofa dip beside me. His warmth was a sudden, welcome presence in the cold, dark room. "You're afraid of storms." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer, too embarrassed to admit it. "My brother was too," he said quietly. The confession hung in the air between us. When we were kids, whenever there was a thunderstorm, he'd crawl into my bed. He said he felt safer. Funny, him being the older one. The image of a young Lorenzo, a protector even then, was so vivid, so poignant, it made my chest ache. "What about you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Were you ever afraid of anything?" A flash of lightning lit his face. He was looking at me, his expression unguarded, vulnerable. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "I was afraid of failing him, of not being strong enough to protect him. In the end, I was right to be." The raw guilt in his voice was a physical blow. This was the wound he carried, the failure that had defined him. We sat in silence for a long moment, the storm raging outside, a mirror to the turmoil he carried within him. "It wasn't your fault," I said softly. "Wasn't it?" he countered, his voice bitter. "I was the one who survived. I was the one who was left to pick up the pieces." I reached out in the darkness, my hand finding his. His skin was warm, his fingers long and strong. He laced his fingers with mine, his grip tight, almost desperate. It wasn't a gesture of ownership or control. It was the touch of a drowning man holding onto a lifeline. We sat like that for what felt like hours, holding hands in the dark while the storm battered the city. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. In the shared, confined darkness, with the raw power of nature stripping away all pretense, a new level of intimacy was forged between us. It was more profound than a kiss, more honest than any conversation we'd had. It was a connection of shared vulnerability, a quiet acknowledgement that we were both, in our own ways, survivors of storms. When the power finally flickered back on, flooding the room with soft, artificial light, we blinked as if waking from a dream. We were still holding hands. Slowly, reluctantly, he released me. The moment was broken, but not forgotten. "I should check on the generators," he said, his voice hoarse. He stood up and walked away, not looking back. I stayed on the sofa, my hand still tingling from the warmth of his. The storm outside was beginning to subside, its fury spent. But inside me, a different kind of storm was just beginning to gather strength. My carefully constructed defenses against him were gone, washed away by the deluge of his confession and the simple, profound act of holding his hand in the dark. I wasn't just playing a part anymore. I was starting to care for the lonely, broken man behind the mask. And that was a complication I was no longer sure I wanted to survive. In the weeks that followed, something fundamental shifted. Lorenzo began to include me in his life in small, significant ways. He'd ask my opinion on a piece of art he was considering for the apartment. He'd leave a book on my nightstand he thought I might enjoy. A collection of poetry, a novel about Renaissance Florence. They were small gestures, but they were acknowledgments of me, Natalie, not just the woman he'd contracted to be his companion. He took me to a private gallery opening one night. It wasn't a command performance like the gala. He simply said, There's a new exhibit of German expressionists I think you'd appreciate. I'd like you to come with me." We walked through the quiet gallery, and for the first time, we talked. Really talked. I told him about my favorite artists, about the theories I'd studied in my brief time at university. He listened, truly listened, asking intelligent questions, his gaze focused and intent. He wasn't pretending. He was genuinely interested. Standing in front of a painting by Franz Marc, a swirl of vibrant, emotional color, I felt a flicker of my old self, the girl who dreamed of a life surrounded by art, return. "I love this one," I said, tracing the lines of the painting in the air. "The way he uses color to convey emotion, not just depict reality. It's so raw." "Like you," he said quietly, looking not at the painting, but at me. My breath caught. "What?" "You're raw," he repeated, his voice soft. "You don't hide what you feel. It's all there, in your eyes, fear, anger, compassion." He took a step closer. "It's the most honest thing in my life." The intensity in his gaze was overwhelming. The air between us was thick with all the things we hadn't said since the night of the storm, since the kiss. The gallery was empty, save for the two of us and the silent watching paintings. It felt as though the world had fallen away. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing my cheek. "Natalie," he began, his voice thick with an emotion I was beginning to recognize. Whatever he was about to say was cut off by the vibration of his phone. He pulled it out, his expression hardening as he looked at the screen. The moment was shattered. The crime boss was back. "I have to take this," he said, his tone clipped. He turned and walked a few feet away, his back to me. His voice was low, but I could hear the cold fury in it. "What do you mean you lost the shipment? I don't want excuses, I want results. Find it, and find out who was behind this." I watched him, a cold knot forming in my stomach. It was a stark reminder of the world I was living in, a world of lost shipments and violent retribution. A world where men like him gave orders that could end lives, and I was falling for him. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't just grateful. I wasn't just sympathetic. I was falling in love with Lorenzo Falcone. The thought was so terrifying, so utterly insane, that I felt dizzy. How could I love a man like him? A man who lived by a code of violence and fear. But how could I not, when he was also the man who grieved for his brother, who understood art, who had given my sister back her future, who looked at me like I was the only real thing in his world? When he finished his call, the softness was gone from his face. He was closed off again, distant. "We're leaving," he said. The ride home was silent. I stared out the window, my mind reeling. I was trapped, not just in his penthouse, but in my own heart. To love him was to accept his world, to make peace with the darkness that came with it. Could I do that? Should I? That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in the library, pulling books from the shelves at random. I needed a distraction, something to quiet the war in my head. I pulled down a heavy volume on Renaissance art, and it fell open to a chapter on Caravaggio. I stared at the images, the dramatic interplay of light and shadow, the raw, violent, beautiful humanity. It reminded me of Lorenzo, a man made of darkness and light, beauty and brutality. The library door opened. It was him. He was still in his suit, but his tie was gone and his sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong, tanned forearms. "I couldn't sleep," he said, as if in answer to my unasked question. He walked over to the bar cart in the corner and poured himself a whiskey. He looked at me over the rim of the glass. "What are you thinking about so hard, Natalie?" "Caravaggio," I said, holding up the book. "He was a murderer, a brawler, but he painted like an angel." Lorenzo nodded slowly, understanding my unspoken comparison. "Some men are forged in violence," he said. "It becomes a part of them. It doesn't mean it's all they are." He walked over and stood in front of me. He took the book from my hands and set it aside. He cupped my face, his hands warm against my skin. "When I'm with you," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper, "I feel quiet. The noise in my head stops. You're the only thing that's ever been able to do that." My heart ached. He was confessing something more profound than love. I was his peace, his sanctuary. "Lorenzo," I whispered, my hands coming up to rest on his chest. He leaned down and kissed me. This time, it wasn't the hard, desperate kiss of the gala night. It was slow and deep and full of a breathtaking tenderness that shattered my last defenses. It was a kiss of exploration, of reverence. It was a question, and my response, as I leaned into him, as my arms went around his neck, was the answer. This was the turning point. There was no going back. The arrangement was a ghost, a fiction we had both outgrown. This was real. He was real. My feelings for him were real. In the quiet of the library, surrounded by the stories of the past, we began to write our own, a dangerous, beautiful, and complicated story of a crime boss and the waitress who had accidentally stumbled into his life and his heart. The external threats of his world still existed, lurking just outside the windows of our glass tower, but for now, in his arms, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt home. Our new reality was a fragile bubble. Inside, there was a tentative, growing tenderness. Lorenzo started coming home earlier. We'd have dinner, and then we'd sit in the library and talk for hours. He told me more about Matteo, about his childhood, about the weight of the Falcone name. I told him about my dreams of opening a small art gallery, about my mother, about the constant fear that had been my companion for so long. We were slowly, carefully, mapping the secret territories of each other's souls. But outside the bubble, his world churned on. His phone would ring at all hours, and his face would transform, the tenderness vanishing, replaced by the cold mask of command. I learned to ignore the snippets of conversation I overheard, mentions of territories, rivals, betrayals. I told myself it had nothing to do with us, with the quiet space we were building together. It was a willful blindness, a necessary lie I told myself to keep from going mad. One afternoon, I was reading in the living room when I heard raised voices from Lorenzo's office. One voice was his, low and angry. The other was Marco's. I couldn't help but overhear. "Unacceptable losses, Lorenzo," Marco was saying, his voice strained. "The Ricci family is moving in on the South Side docks, and this missing shipment, it's the third one this quarter. We're bleeding money. We look weak." "I am aware of the situation, Marco." Lorenzo's voice was dangerously calm. "I am handling it." "Are you?" Marco shot back, his voice dripping with insubordination I was shocked to hear. "Or are you distracted? Ever since she arrived, you've been soft. People are talking. They say you've lost your edge." There was a heavy silence. Then, the sound of something crashing against a wall. I flinched. "Get out!" Lorenzo growled, his voice a lethal whisper. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." The office door flew open and Marco stormed out, his face flushed with anger. He saw me sitting there and his eyes narrowed with pure venom. He looked like he wanted to say something, but then he seemed to think better of it, turned on his heel, and left the apartment, slamming the front door behind him. I sat there, my heart pounding, distracted, soft, because of me. Marco's words echoed in my head. Was it true? Was my presence here making Lorenzo vulnerable? Was I a weakness his enemies could exploit? The thought made me feel ill. A few moments later, Lorenzo emerged from his office. His knuckles were bruised and bleeding. He must have punched the wall. He saw me looking at his hand and quickly shoved it into his pocket. "It's nothing," he said, his voice tight. "Lorenzo, what's happening?" I asked, standing up. "What did he mean, you're getting soft?" "Marco is overreacting. It's business. Don't worry about it," He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Don't lie to me," I said, echoing his own rule back at him. "I'm not a child. If I'm a liability to you, if my being here is putting you in danger, you have to tell me." He finally looked at me, and the conflict in his eyes was agonizing. "You are not a liability," he said, his voice rough. "You are the only thing that makes any of this bearable." But he's right. My focus has shifted, and they can smell it. My enemies. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness. "There's a traitor in my organization. Someone on the inside is feeding information to the Ricci's. That's how they knew about the shipments. I don't know who to trust anymore. Except me." The words were unspoken, but I heard them. In a world of sharks and snakes, I was the one person he could be sure of. The responsibility of that was immense. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to end it," he said, his eyes turning hard as flint. "I'm setting a trap, a final large shipment. Only a handful of people will know the route. Whoever leaks it is the traitor." A cold dread washed over me. This was it. The violence of his world was no longer something I could ignore. It was here, in our home, in the blood on his knuckles, and the plan for a deadly trap. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. It was Sophia, her face pale and her hands trembling. She asked to speak to Lorenzo in private. A few minutes later, he came out of the office, his face grim. "Sophia's nephew," he said, his voice low. "He works on the docks. He got into some trouble, some gambling debts. Some men came to his apartment tonight. They beat him badly. They said it was a message for me." "The Ricci's," I whispered. "Yes." He clenched his fists. "They're escalating. They're no longer just targeting my business. They're coming after people. Innocent people." He looked at me, and the fear in his eyes was not for himself. It was for me, and for Chloe. This was the protective act. It wasn't about defending me from a catty socialite. This was real. This was a threat to everything he held dear. He was a king whose kingdom was under siege, and his queen was a target. "I'm moving you," he said decisively. "And your sister. Tonight. I have a house upstate. It's secluded, secure. No one knows about it but me and my most trusted men. You'll be safe there until I handle this." "Handle this? Lorenzo, this is insane. You can't just go to war." "I have no choice," he said, his voice raw. "They've made it personal. They threatened my family." He looked at me, and his meaning was clear. I was his family now. "I will not let what happened to Matteo happen to you." The fear was suffocating, but his words, his fierce, protective gaze, cut through it. He wasn't pushing me away. He was protecting me. He was shielding me with his own body, his own life if necessary. Two of his most loyal guards, silent men I recognized but didn't know, arrived. Within an hour, we were in the back of an armored SUV, speeding out of the city. Another car was sent for Chloe, with a story concocted about a sudden corporate retreat I needed her to join me on. It was a mess of lies and fear, but it was necessary. As the city lights faded behind us, I looked at Lorenzo's grim profile in the darkness of the car. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw set. He was going to war, and he was doing it for me, for us. The thought was both terrifying and humbling. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold as ice. He gripped my hand tightly, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between us, a bond that was about to be tested by fire and blood. The bubble had burst. We were in his world now, and the only way out was through. The house upstate was a fortress disguised as a rustic lodge. Built of dark wood and river stone, it was nestled deep within a thick forest, miles from any main road. It was beautiful, but the high-tech security cameras hidden in the trees and the presence of Lorenzo's silent, watchful guards were a constant reminder of why we were here. Chloe arrived a few hours after us, confused but excited by the sudden retreat. The clean, crisp mountain air was good for her, and she seemed to thrive, exploring the woods around the house with a newfound energy that brought tears to my eyes. For her, this was an adventure. For me, it was a holding cell. Lorenzo stayed with us for 2 days, coordinating his plans by encrypted phone. He was a different person here. The weight of the city seemed to have lifted from his shoulders, replaced by the grim determination of a general on the eve of battle. He was tense, coiled like a spring, but in the quiet moments, when he watched Chloe laugh, or when he looked at me, there was a softness, a longing for this peace he was fighting for. On the 3rd morning, he told me he had to go back. The trap was set. "It will be over in 48 hours, he said, holding my arms, his gaze intense. "Stay here. Don't leave the property. My men will protect you. I'll come back for you." "Be careful," I whispered, my throat tight with fear. "Lorenzo, please." "I have something to come back for now," he said, his voice rough. He kissed me, a hard, desperate kiss full of fear and promise. And then he was gone. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I tried to be normal for Chloe's sake, but my mind was in Chicago with Lorenzo. Every time the phone rang, my heart stopped. Every creak of the house made me jump. On the 2nd night, I was sitting up late, unable to sleep, when my new, clean phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. My blood ran cold. I answered, my hand trembling. "Natalie." It was Marco. "How did you get this number?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "That doesn't matter," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "What matters is that your boyfriend's plan has a flaw. He thinks the traitor is going to leak the route to the Ricci's. But he's wrong." "What are you talking about?" "I am the traitor, Natalie," he said, and I could hear the smug satisfaction in his voice. "But I'm not working with the Ricci's. I'm working for myself. Lorenzo thinks his shipment is the bait. He's wrong. You are the bait." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "He's so predictable," Marco sneered. "So focused on protecting you. While he's waiting for the Ricci's to hit his trucks on the south side, my men are on their way to you. They'll be there in 20 minutes. A simple kidnapping. Once I have you and the sick little sister, Lorenzo will give me everything, the entire Falcone empire, in exchange for his precious family." My mind went blank with terror. He had played Lorenzo perfectly, using his love for me as the ultimate weapon. "It's a shame, really," Marco continued. "He was a great leader before you. You made him weak, Natalie. You made him human. And in our world, humans get eaten." He hung up. For a full 10 seconds, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. 20 minutes. He had sold Lorenzo out. He had betrayed him. The man Lorenzo had trusted. The man who had been like a brother to him since Matteo's death. The true betrayal wasn't the business, it was the personal devastation. Then, the panic gave way to a cold, clear fury. He was not taking my sister. He was not going to use me to destroy the man I loved. I ran to Lorenzo's study. His guards were posted outside, but they wouldn't be expecting an attack here. This was supposed to be the safe house. Marco's men would have the element of surprise. I couldn't rely on them alone. I had to warn Lorenzo. I grabbed the encrypted satellite phone he'd left on his desk. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number he'd scrawled on a notepad. "What is it?" He answered immediately, his voice sharp. "Lorenzo, it's a trap," I sobbed, the words tumbling out. "It's Marco. He's the traitor. He's not hitting the shipment. He's coming here. For me and Chloe. He sent his men. They'll be here any minute." There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, a string of vicious curses. "Natalie, listen to me. Get Chloe. Go to the master bedroom. There's a panic room behind the bookshelf. The code is Matteo's birthday. 0811. Get inside and lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered. "I'm coming," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl of pure rage. "I'm coming for you." The line went dead. I ran to Chloe's room and shook her awake. "Get up! We have to go, now!" She was groggy and confused, but the terror in my voice got through to her. I dragged her down the hall to Lorenzo's bedroom just as the first gunshots erupted outside. The sound was deafening, a brutal violation of the forest's peace. Chloe screamed. I shoved her towards the large, ornate bookshelf. "Help me!" I grunted, and together we pushed. It swung inward, revealing a thick steel door with a keypad. My fingers fumbled with the code. 0811. A green light flashed and the door hissed open. I pushed Chloe inside and scrambled in after her, slamming the heavy door shut just as the bedroom door splintered open. I hit the lock button, and we were plunged into darkness and silence, the sound of shouting and gunfire suddenly muffled. We were safe. For now. I held my sobbing sister in the dark, my own body trembling uncontrollably. All I could do was pray that Lorenzo would get here in time. I had played my part. Now, we were in the climax, and the only thing standing between us and destruction was Lorenzo's love and his capacity for violence. I had to trust him. I had to trust that the monster I had fallen in love with would be enough to save us all. The silence inside the panic room was absolute, a stark contrast to the muffled sounds of violence we'd heard just moments before. Chloe's sobs slowly subsided into shaky, hitched breaths. She clung to me, her small frame trembling. I held her tight, trying to project a calm I was nowhere near feeling. My ears strained, trying to decipher the muted pops and crashes from outside. Was that Lorenzo's men fighting back, or Marco's men tearing the house apart looking for us? Time ceased to have meaning, every second stretched into an eternity of terrifying uncertainty. I whispered reassurances to Chloe, lies about how everything was going to be okay, how it was all a big misunderstanding. But my mind was a maelstrom of horrific possibilities. What if Lorenzo didn't make it? What if Marco's men found a way to breach the door? My thoughts fixated on Marco's words. You made him weak. You made him human. Was it true? Had my presence in Lorenzo's life, this love that had become the center of my world, been the catalyst for his downfall? The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, the sounds from outside changed. The sporadic gunfire intensified into a full-blown firefight, louder and more ferocious. A new wave of shouting, a different tone, more disciplined. It had to be Lorenzo. He was here. A surge of desperate hope shot through me. He was here, fighting for us. The king had come to reclaim his castle. The battle raged for what felt like an hour, though it was probably less than 15 minutes. The sounds were terrifying. The roar of automatic weapons, the splintering of wood, the shattering of glass, the guttural shouts of men in combat. And then, as suddenly as it began, it fell silent. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. Who had won? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I held my breath, listening. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, approaching the bedroom. They stopped outside the bookshelf. My grip on Chloe tightened. A soft knock on the steel door. Natalie? Lorenzo's voice. Rough, strained, but it was him. Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees went weak. I scrambled to the keypad and fumbled with the release button. The heavy door swung open. Lorenzo stood there, framed by the wrecked doorway of his bedroom. He was a terrifying, beautiful sight. His face was smudged with dirt and streaked with something dark that I prayed wasn't his blood. His suit was torn, his knuckles were raw, but his eyes, when they found mine, were filled with a fierce, desperate relief. He held a gun in his hand, held loosely at his side, as if it were an extension of his arm. Behind him, his men, grim-faced and efficient, were securing the house. I threw myself into his arms, burying my face in his chest, inhaling the scent of him, gunpowder, sweat, and that familiar, clean scent that was all his own. He dropped the gun, and his arms came around me, crushing me to him. His body was tense, vibrating with the aftermath of violence, but his hold was an anchor in the storm. "You're safe," he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you. You're safe." He held me for a long moment, then gently set me back, his hands framing my face. He scanned me from head to toe, his eyes checking for any injury. Then he looked past me to a wide-eyed Chloe, who was huddled by the panic room door. His expression softened. "It's over now," he said to her, his voice gentle. "You're safe." But it wasn't over. Not yet. "Marco?" I asked, my voice trembling. Lorenzo's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "He wasn't here. He sent his men to do his dirty work, but he's not getting away." He turned to one of his men. "Get them out of here. Take them to the city, to the penthouse. Double the guard. No one gets in or out without my direct authorization." He looked back at me. "I have to finish this." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "Lorenzo, don't. Let the police handle it. It's over." He gave a short, bitter laugh. "The police don't handle men like Marco. This is my world, Natalie. My rules. He betrayed my family. He threatened my family. There's only one punishment for that." He looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I have to do this, so that you and Chloe can be safe, truly safe, forever, so that this part of my life can be over." He was going to kill him, and he was doing it for us. It was the ultimate, terrible expression of his love. He was purging the darkness from his kingdom so that we could live in the light. I looked into his eyes, saw the ghost of Matteo, the weight of his father's legacy, the fierce, protective love for me. And I understood. I couldn't ask him to be a man he wasn't. Not now. His very nature, the ruthlessness I had once feared, was now our salvation. I nodded slowly, my heart aching. I lifted a hand and gently touched the bruise forming on his cheekbone. "Come back to me," I whispered. "Always," he promised. He kissed my forehead, a final, solemn vow. Then he turned and strode out of the room, a king marching to the final battle, leaving me to grapple with the terrible, beautiful truth of the man I loved. The hours I spent waiting in the penthouse were a unique form of torture. Chloe, sedated by a doctor Lorenzo had sent, was sleeping peacefully in her old room, which had been redecorated and equipped with medical monitoring equipment. She was safe, but my own anxiety was a live wire. Sophia stayed with me, her calm presence a small comfort, but nothing could quell the storm in my mind. I paced the vast living room, the city lights outside a mocking reminder of a world that continued on, oblivious to the life and death drama playing out in its shadows. Every car that passed, every distant siren, sent a jolt of fear through me. I was waiting for a call, a knock, any sign that it was finally, truly over. Just before dawn, the elevator chimed. I froze, my heart in my throat. The doors opened and Lorenzo stepped out. He was alone. He looked exhausted, drained to the bone. The fire of battle was gone from his eyes, replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness. There was a fresh cut on his cheek, but he was whole. He was alive. I ran to him, and he met me halfway, folding me into his arms. He held me so tightly I could barely breathe, and I clung to him just as hard. He was real. He was here. He had come back to me. "It's done," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper against my hair. I didn't need to ask what that meant. I could feel it in the finality of his tone, in the way the tension had finally seeped out of his powerful frame. Marco was gone. The threat was neutralized. The war was over. He led me to the sofa, and we sat, still holding on to each other, as the sun began to rise over the lake, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and gold. A new day, a new beginning. He confessed everything before the end, Lorenzo said quietly, staring at the sunrise. The car bomb that killed my family. It wasn't the Ricci's. It was Marco. He was working with a rival faction inside my father's own organization. He was ambitious. He thought with my father and Matteo gone, he could manipulate me, control the family through me. He orchestrated my entire life's vengeance. The men I hunted down, the war I fought, it was all based on his lie. The magnitude of the betrayal was staggering. Lorenzo's entire adult life, the ruthlessness he'd been forced to adopt, the guilt he carried for Matteo. It was all built on the machinations of the man he'd trusted most. "Lorenzo," I breathed, my heart breaking for him. "It's strange," he said, a hollow look in his eyes. "For 15 years, my life has been driven by that one purpose, revenge. And now, it's over. The ghost is gone." He turned to me, his gaze clearing, focusing on me with an incredible intensity. "And all I care about is what's right here." He gently tucked a piece of hair behind my ear. "The original agreement is fulfilled. Your sister is safe. Her future is secure. The threat is gone. You are free, Natalie. There are no more conditions, no more rules. I'll have my driver take you wherever you want to go. Back to your old life if you want. I'll provide for you and Chloe, of course. You'll never have to worry about money again. You don't owe me anything." He was offering me an out, an escape from his world, from him. He was giving me back my freedom, the very thing I had once craved more than anything. I could walk away right now, leave the gilded cage and the dangerous man behind, and build a new life for myself and Chloe, a normal life. I looked at him, at this beautiful, broken, dangerous man who had been forged in tragedy and betrayal. I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that I would take the freedom he was offering, that I would leave him alone in his silent, perfect penthouse with the ghosts of his past. He had purged his world of its demons, but he expected to remain alone in the aftermath. I thought about my old life, the exhaustion, the desperation, the constant fear, and I thought about this new life, the terror, the violence, but also the moments of breathtaking tenderness, the profound connection, the feeling of being truly seen, truly loved. I had a choice. It wasn't about a contract or a debt anymore. It was about what I wanted, who I wanted. I reached up and cupped his face, my thumb stroking the cut on his cheek. "What if I don't want my old life?" I asked softly. "What if the place I want to be is right here?" Hope, fragile and brilliant, dawned in his eyes. "Natalie, my world it will always be dangerous. I can't change what I am." "I'm not asking you to," I said, my voice firm. "I fell in love with the man who runs a criminal empire and reads poetry in a quiet library. I fell in love with the man who can order a death and then cry over the memory of his brother. I don't want pieces of you, Lorenzo. I want all of you." A single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closing. "I love you, Natalie Blake," he whispered, his voice thick with a lifetime of unspoken emotion. "God help me, I love you." "I love you too," I said, my own tears finally falling. This was the new pact, not a contract written by lawyers, but a covenant written on our hearts. It wasn't a relationship of necessity anymore. It was one of choice. My choice. I was no longer the reactive girl who spilled coffee, trapped by circumstance. I was proactive, empowered. I was choosing this life. I was choosing him. He kissed me then, a kiss that was not about passion or desperation, but about peace and promise. It was the kiss of a new beginning, a final, unified resolution. The external plot of his life and the internal conflict of mine had converged and found their answer in each other. As the sun filled the room with light, I knew things wouldn't be easy. His world was still out there. But it wasn't his world anymore. It was ours. And together, the king of the Chicago underworld and the waitress who had seen the man behind the crown would face it. I was no longer in his sights. I was by his side. And that was exactly where I belonged.